Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:07 p.m. in a very dark, gloomy Budapest, where it's still middle of winter. I mean, those longer days and warmer weather that we've been told to expect are not materializing. And on top of the absolutely brutal gas bills that they hit you with here, because they punish you. It's not just that you have to pay more in the winter because you're using more gas. You get punished for using more gas. So you're paying the extra for the additional use of gas, and then you pay on top of that a double extra for daring to use more gas in the winter. Um, so that's a depressing aspect of winters in Budapest. And the other thing that I need to address, which I haven't really said much about, but there is a real problem in Budapest, as there is in many other cities, but yeah, I think it's among the worst in Budapest, to be honest. I mean, this is the bicycle delivery guys. These are the people who are delivering food to people who are too lazy to go out and buy any food and too lazy to prepare food for themselves. So they order food in, and hence the city is cluttered up with these delivery cyclists. Now, the problem here is obviously that if you're living in a city, like Budapest. I mean, it's not New York, but nonetheless, it's a major city. I mean, you have stores, shops that are open pretty late. Again, not as late as in New York, but nonetheless pretty late. And you have supermarkets that are certainly open till 9 p.m. So therefore, every sentient being, can go out at some point during the day and buy some food, and then can prepare some food at home. But instead, you say, no, 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 I'm gonna order my food in, and that would be okay, as long as it didn't really cause this real um, blow to the quality of life. And again, Viktor Orban talks a lot about the quality of life in Hungary, but this is really detrimental to the quality of life, because you're cluttering up the cities with these food delivery guys. They're very dangerous to pedestrians. They're extremely dangerous to other cyclists, such as myself, since they don't pay any attention to um, any kind of rules as to how to ride bicycles properly without endangering other cyclists. And um, and, and obviously they're a threat to the traffic. And again, it's a problem that there's no real need for this. Again, back when I lived here as a child, I mean, the shops closed at 5. Good luck trying to you know buy anything after 5 o'clock. And yet you didn't have these mad cyclists going everywhere. So the problem is obviously that the Hungarian authorities are not cracking down on this. There are all sorts of things that you can do to crack down on this promiscuous use of cyclists. The most obvious is that you have to punish people who rely excessively on getting their food delivered. Well, how do you punish them? Well, you put a tax on. You put a delivery tax on every order. Once it becomes forbiddingly expensive, to get your food delivered by the cyclist, then people will think twice about picking up a phone and getting their food delivery order in. And then you also can make the delivery companies pay their cyclists properly, and assume the risks of hiring these cyclists. You can have that they have to pay insurance. They don't have them as independent contractors. And so even pay for their health insurance, all sorts of things that remove the appeal of hiring a whole bunch of cyclists and have them rushing around the city and delivering food. So in other words, make others pay for this. Instead, the companies, the delivery companies, are not paying for this, and the only people who are paying for this are the cyclists and pedestrians. They're the ones who have to bear the burden of essentially, people too lazy to do their own shopping. Anyway, with that out of the way, we can address a few things. So first of all, we had the an apparent exchange of an American who had been imprisoned in Russia. And so we had Steve Witkoff was in Russia, and this American teacher who came into the country with what he said was medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is, of course, one of these completely nonsensical notions, because, of course, marijuana, no evidence that marijuana has any positive medical uses. And no doctor has ever been able to present any plausible case whereby marijuana has positive medical effects. On the contrary, all the evidence is that it has no effects, and in fact has actually detrimental effects on one's health, particularly detrimental effects on one's cognitive health. But okay, be that as may, he was arrested in Russia, I think, in 2021. He's been in prison since then, and has now been released, which is obviously very good news for him, very good news for his family. Now the question is, what does that portend? So we're told that this is an exchange. Now, if it's an exchange, then what exactly that has been exchanged? He's been released, but normally you would expect, well, who else has been released as far as any Russian who is being held in the United States? I mean, in the past, all of these kinds of prisoner exchanges have involved some Russians being relieved in exchange for some released, rather not relieved, released in exchange for some Americans released. But none of that has appeared. So I have to think that this is on the part of the Russians a goodwill gesture to show that the Trump administration that Russia is willing to be very accommodating, and indeed that's the noises that are coming out from the Trump administration, from Mike Waltz. Oh yeah, well, things are now moving in a very positive direction in our talks with Russia. Now, well, we can obviously talk a little bit about that. However, I mean, I'm constantly reading CNN, and they're all telling me that Russia, under no circumstances, is going to negotiate anything. No. Russia's winning this war. They're wiping the floor with the Ukrainian armed forces. They're making mincemeat of Ukraine. They're making inexorable progress, smashing to pieces Ukrainian front lines, and therefore Russia has no incentive to negotiate anything. So that's the view from CNN. Clearly, that isn't of a piece anything with coming out from Moscow. that was that. Or we can talk a little bit about the state of play with the Ukrainian negotiations. But the interesting thing was the arrival of the King of Jordan in Washington, and that really excruciating press, I don't know, press gaggle um, in the Oval Office with the King of Jordan and Trump, which again, Trump uh, doing his thing, doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down, quintupling down, and so on. I mean, then it gets more complicated. On his promise to take over Gaza and to dump the Palestinians on other people. So it seems as if his view of the Palestinians is like, you've got a litter, you've got your cat, has a litter, and you have to then distribute them among your friends. So you have this friend gets two, another one gets one, another one. You got to start thinking of all your friends and acquaintances to whom you're going to distribute your litter. So that's his view of this, the 2 million. He knows that, well, you can't really dump 2 million on Jordan, and you can't dump 2 million on Egypt, but maybe we can get a lot of other people from all around the world. We got the Albanians, Indonesians, and so the Palestinians can just be distributed among many different countries. Obviously, that cannot happen for very obvious reasons, because the actual physical process of driving out 2 million people is beyond the abilities of Israel, and is beyond the abilities of the United States, beyond the will and the abilities of both Israel and the United States. Um, so because of course Trump has more or less said that the Palestinians cannot come back. So it's not like and other members of the administration said, yeah, well, that's just a temporary rehousing. You're going to live with your neighbors, with your uncle, until your house is refurbished. But no, Trump made clear no one's coming back. He kind of hedged a little bit today, because he said, well, some of them might be able to come back. But the problem is obviously the only way you can drive people out is if you go in physically. Your army goes in physically and starts picking people up, packing them on to railway trucks, or just the usual trucks, putting them in there, and then shipping them off wherever. And again, Trump, when he's asked, well, what if they don't want to go? A very obvious question. Well, what are you going to do then? Oh, they'll want to go. No, it's so terrible there. He never really goes into, well, why is it so terrible there? It's other than blaming Hamas. It's all Hamas's fault that things are so terrible. No, they'll want to go. But since we obviously know that they don't want to go, then you have to say, well, Israel, it would have to be Israel, because the United States can't go in and start picking people up physically and dumping them aboard buses or trucks or railway carriages and everything. It cannot be done. And bombing doesn't do the job, because if it did, Israel would have already accomplished the depopulation of Gaza. That it hasn't accomplished that. Israel has been bombing and bombing and bombing, and it hasn't accomplished the expulsion of the population. And it won't accomplish the expulsion of the population. So you actually have to go in and physically pick people up, and dump them out. So as it says, the Azerbaijanis did it. Well, the Azerbaijanis, they're the um, the Armenians in Nagorno Karabakh fled. Also, the numbers are very different. I mean, the numbers who were living in Nagorno Karabakh was only about 150,000. And again, there were Armenians, and then Armenia was obviously going to take them. But here you're talking about you don't have anywhere to take them. So again, as I say, 150,000. That's not the same thing as 2 million. Um, so that there is that, and again, they actually fled without putting up any kind of a fight. Um, that's really not the case with the Palestinians. I mean, they're going to put up a fight. They're not going to go. They will resist. They can't defeat the Israelis, but they will resist being expelled. So then the real so you don't have anyone who's willing to take them. This nonsense of Albanians, I mean, and Indonesians. Albania is always just, hey, can you pay us a nice chunk of change, and we will take them. And again, notes how we could just break them up, send here and send there, and so on. Note also that when Trump was asked, well, what about America taking them? Oh, no, we're too far, too far away. America's just too far. We can't take them. Yeah, but Indonesia is not too far. And again, what does it matter how far it is? Because you've already made clear that they're not going to come back. So if they're not coming back, then they can go to America. They can go to Indonesia, and anywhere you can, whatever. And of course, it raises the question. I mean, I'm not the first to raise it. Others have already raised the question. Well, why can't we just dump Israel somewhere? Just pick up 9 million Israelis and just dump them somewhere. I mean, why 2 million Gazans, and why push the West Bank, even though Trump is deliberate in not bringing up the subject of the West Bank. Is only talking about Gaza. But ultimately, I mean, what's the population of Israel? About 9 million, let's say. Okay, well, 9 million, you could easily, remove the 9 million, particularly as there are so many rich Jews around in the world. They're obviously going to be, number of them can help out. They have, all sorts of very wealthy, rich property, rich land that they own. You can absolutely just pick them up and dump them. Now, nobody in the press gaggle asked Trump this obvious question. Well, why are you picking these people? Why don't you just pick these, dump these Israelis somewhere? And I doubtless Trump would say, well, yeah, but Israel is, they're the tough guys, they're strong, they're the winners. The winners don't get to leave. It's the losers who get to leave. Well, it all depends. If it's still only 9 million. And then when you look at the sort of the Arab world, and you look at, well, nothing has been more disastrous to peace and stability in the Middle East than that harebrained idea in the 19th century, and then enunciated in the Balfour Declaration, of creating a Jewish homeland in a place where the Jews really had very little connection. And creating a homeland where there was such active resistance to the arrival of Jews who came from all sorts of different parts of the world. This was a really bad idea. It was a completely disastrous. And you're bringing in people who had no connection at all to that land, and removing from that land the people who actually did have a connection to it. So it's been a really bad idea all around. So if you're going to be moving anyone out, then you go, well, let's move them out. But of course, that's the kind of talk that's absolutely forbidden. Um, so, my view is that this will not happen, and it cannot happen because there won't be any takers for this plan. And the king of Jordan talked today about, oh, we've taken, I think, 2,000 um, children from Gaza who are suffering from cancer. We're going to, we'll provide them with hospital care in Jordan, but and also go, fly them somewhere where they can enjoy hospital care. Maybe in Germany or whatever. Again, no questions. Well, how did they get cancer? There's a lot of children with cancer in Gaza. Could it be that this 16 months of pulverization by Israel has led to cancer among children? Um, so the uh, I don't think they can take it. Now, Trump will doubtless start his routine of threatening to withhold economic and financial aid from Egypt, from Jordan, and so on. And that can be quite effective. I mean, these are not wealthy countries; they do rely on the United States. The the problem is that whatever the shortfall that this will cause, the alternative will be really much more painful because okay, let's say you get a 4 billion subsidy, whatever. Egypt gets a $4 billion subsidy from the United States. Okay, that's 4 billion. How much are you going to lose as a result of Palestinians moving into the Sinai or elsewhere in Egypt? You're going to cause great deal of social problems in the country. I mean, you're going to have to provide housing. You're going to have to provide education. You have to provide health services, and all sorts of things. Now, is America going to foot the bill? I don't know. I would doubt it. So that's going to be a huge cost. But more seriously, the costs in the social turmoil that it will cause in Egypt, and in uh, engendering a ferocious resistance on the part of the Palestinians, because of course the Palestinians in Sinai will immediately resume their war against Israel. They always have. They're not just going to forget about it. Oh well, okay. Well now we're here. Let's just forget about Israel. It's never happened before. The Palestinians who moved to Lebanon in the aftermath of the 1967 war, or they moved to Jordan again in the aftermath of the 1967 war, did not suddenly forget about Israel. They continued their war against Israel. So Israel's problems that only multiplied after 67, and even when they drove the PLO out of Lebanon in 1982, again the PLO moved to Tunis, and still Israel had the problem. So you move them into Sinai, and then again, right? They'll say, "Well, that's it. We got to, resume the fight." They're not going to abandon the um, so so Judy Hotchkiss, I just cut this, says Balfour was not really harebrained and disastrous, but was deliberately designed from the beginning to create endless conflict, the British imperial design, divide and conquer. Well, I agree with that, and I think that was the case, and I think it was a terrible idea. But I think it was also in part to bring the Americans into the war. It was a way of currying favor with the United States, and that, it was no question the British were promising one thing to the Jews, and they were promising something else to the Arabs. Um, but the the British kind of continued with that policy until they kind of realized that this was a total disaster, and then they finally they came to some sense in 1939 with the white paper. The Neville Chamberlain government was published their white paper, which then prohibited all Jewish immigration into Palestine. It's one of the reasons, incidentally, that Neville Chamberlain is hated as much as he is. I mean, he's basically, I think Chamberlain had many sensible policies. I think again his policy for peace in Europe was, I think, a sensible one, and I think his policy with the white paper, where he basically cancelled the Peel Commission report, of creating this essentially kind of creating the partition of Palestine. They abandoned, and they just simply said, no, well, that's it. We're not going to let anybody in because it's just so causing such a problem for us with this mass immigration. But again, without question, it's one of the reasons Chamberlain is hated so much. But just my main point is that the Balfour Declaration, and again the Jews were coming into Palestine. Before that, while the Ottomans were ostensibly still ruling Palestine. So, the Balfour Declaration was made after the British took over Palestine, and then once they got the League of Nations mandate, it became the Balfour Declaration was enunciated as as a sort of a League of Nations policy. It was essentially, the terms of the mandate that the British had through the League of Nations involved the creation of a Jewish national homeland. So, but the Arabs really had nothing to do with this. I mean, this was forced upon them. So again, if you're going to talk about removing people from the area, then then the people to remove were the ones who really created the problem to begin with, essentially an alien group, and whose presence began creating problems from the beginning. It wasn't even when there was the mass immigration of Jews into Palestine in the 1930s. It wasn't then. It wasn't after 1948. It wasn't after the 67 and the 1970s when the Soviet Union opened the floodgates. The problems with the local population began immediately. It began right in the 19th century. So, but again, I mean, none of these plans of Trump's have any prospect of realization. I mean, how? Because again, you don't have any money to do this, and you don't have the force. But the United States isn't going to send in its troops to drive the Palestinians out. The American forces will not do that. And the Israelis, they don't like combat. They don't like hand-to-hand combat. They avoid it. They're very sparing in their personnel, as we discussed the other day. According to Norman Finkelstein, the Israelis have lost a grand total, I think, of about 500 servicemen since October the 7th. I mean, leave aside the people who were killed on October the 7th, but since October the 7th, they've lost about 500 servicemen. So that's a reflection of how averse Israel is to sustaining casualties. Now, you go in and try to drive people out, and drive them out in resistance. And again, it's very, very different from the case of Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, the Armenians just fled, but also they had somewhere to go in Armenia. But this will involve resistance, and so that Israel is averse to it. But then this is where Trump's idea becomes so insane, because he says, "Oh, we will take ownership of it." So the question then is, how do you take ownership of this piece of territory? I mean, on what basis do you take ownership of it? I mean, it certainly doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to Israel. So I mean, I mean, again, it brings up the issue, which is that Trump knows that from his real estate experience that you have to prove, before you take anything over, that the seller has to show title of ownership. He has to show that that he does indeed own this property. Otherwise, you're just spending money to no good end, because basically the person who's selling you the property doesn't actually own the property that he purports to be selling. So so therefore, for Trump to say, "Well, we'll just take it over," well, how do you take it over? Israel doesn't own it. And how do we know Israel doesn't own it? Well, because the World Court has ruled that Israel doesn't own it. And then we have the innumerable United Nations resolutions making clear Israel doesn't own it, that Israel is an occupying power. So if it's an occupying power, it obviously doesn't own it. So you can't really take it over. And given that, then the question is, well, if you can't prove any kind of deed of ownership, who's going to invest in Gaza? Because that's what he's saying. Oh, we're going to have all these great people investing, then they're going to build all these beachfront property and hotels and casinos. But who's going to do it? I mean, unless you can think that your investment is safe, no one's going to invest. Because then they think, well, we're investing in something that we really don't own. And so our investments would be deemed illegal, and therefore at some point liable for expropriation without any compensation, because they're illegal. So that's obviously going to be a drawback in terms of trying to secure investment there. But the other thing is, of course, that the Palestinians will not abandon resistance. So you can start building your hotels and your casinos, but there'll be the constant threat of attacks, terrorism, and so on. So again, it's not a good investment. And because it's such an obviously crazy scheme, I still think that Trump is presenting it as a negotiating ploy. That somehow he thinks that, come to the Arabs, so we'll come up with a better plan. And I would imagine that the better plan that they will come up with, because they're obviously going to meet, I think, in Riyadh, some maybe over the weekend. The better plan will involve um, some form of joint administration over Gaza. I don't know whether that can work, but at least they can say, well, we will try to run it in a reasonable way. We're going to try and make sure that Hamas isn't in control. But I don't know how they can ensure that, because Hamas still does the day-to-day administration in Gaza, and I don't think Israel would accept it. I don't think, Israel isn't going to accept either the Palestinian Authority running Gaza, or kind of joint Arab condominium running Gaza. But Israel doesn't have a plan of its own either, because Israel says, "Oh, we're going to crush Hamas." That's it. That's our war aim. Our war aim is to crush Hamas. Well, you haven't done a very good job. I mean, you've had 16 months at it, and you haven't succeeded. You haven't destroyed Hamas. And it was always the case that Israel was not going to succeed in this venture. So then, you know, the obvious response there is, and it's a reasonable one. Say, well, yeah, because Israel wasn't really serious about fighting Hamas. Israel really wanted to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza. So it was never really about Hamas, and I think that's probably correct. The But we can see that goal has failed. Israel has not succeeded in driving out the Palestinians. You can see the Palestinians are returning to their homes in northern Gaza. They're going back. So contrary to what Trump was saying, this nonsense he was peddling. I mean, that they wouldn't want to go back. Well, they obviously do want to go back. They say, oh, well, we'll give them this great housing and they'll want to go there. Well, why would they want to go there? I mean, would you want to go? You've been living here and you're going to go to Albania? Why Albania? I mean, what, Indonesia? Why would you want to go to Indonesia? This is where you live. So, so that venture of driving them out, and that's why, I mean, Netanyahu basically hasn't come up with any sort of plan of his own. It's just a lot of big talk, a lot of bluster, and maybe he thinks that Trump will deliver something for him. But he doesn't have a plan. He hasn't succeeded in defeating Hamas. He was never likely to defeat Hamas, and he hasn't driven the Palestinians out of Gaza. No matter how intolerable life has become in Gaza, and Trump is very eloquent about how terrible life is in Gaza. However intolerable life is in Gaza, still the Palestinians refuse to go anywhere. So, I don't think. Now the question is, well, what happens this weekend? So Trump yesterday said that, well, if you don't release all of the hostages, Trump laid down this condition to Hamas: release all of the hostages, then all hell's going to break loose. Release it by, I think, noon on Saturday. The all hell is going to break loose. However, he said that, well, he's speaking only for himself. He's not speaking on behalf of the Israeli government. So in other words, he's issuing a threat against Hamas, but he's issuing the threat on behalf of the Israeli government, even though he immediately adds, I don't speak on behalf of the Israeli government. I'm just speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, but the U.S. government isn't actually threatening anything, because the U.S. government is not a party to the conflict. I mean, it's obviously is, in the sense that it's providing arms, and serious arms, like the sort of the mother of all bombs, the Moabs, that they're providing Israel, but it's providing it with arms. But nonetheless, the bombing and everything is being done by Israel, and Trump hasn't given any indication that the Americans are ready to use the force themselves. So he's issuing a threat, not on behalf of the U.S. government, but on behalf of the Israeli government, while he's saying that I don't speak on behalf of the Israeli government, and so therefore I'm just simply, you know, throwing big words out there, that this is, say, our patience is running thin, and then he did that ridiculous thing about the Holocaust. Oh, they look like Holocaust survivors, um, and and I mean, and all these things are always ridiculous because, um, first of all, they didn't look any worse than the Palestinian prisoners whom the Israelis released. They look emaciated. I mean, some of these are emaciated, but they may also have other health conditions. I mean, yeah, they probably had a hard time. They probably didn't get much food, but they may also have an underlying health conditions, which has led to the emaciated condition. Again, if people remember back from the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there was that famous photograph from a detention camp in 1992, where it looked like these Muslim men like were Holocaust survivors. But that was a staged photograph because, that came out later. There was a staged photograph because what had happened was that one of the Muslim men was actually very ill, and he was going to be emaciated. So they kind of pushed him forward. He was in the foreground of the picture. If you look at, and that's of course what immediately caught everyone's attention, because you see this man and you see, wow, look, you see his ribs are all sticking out, and and there was the the barbed wire, but as we turned out, the barbed wire was actually actually the cameraman was stuck behind the barbed wire. He was actually in the chicken coop. The barbed wire was surrounded the chicken coop, and she was taking the photograph from behind the barbed wire surrounding the chicken coop. So that's why again you see the barbed wire, even though the men were not surrounded by barbed wire, when the photograph was done, you see the barbed wire, and then you see this emaciated man, and that's the arresting image. But if you look carefully at the picture, the rest of the men were not looking emaciated. The rest of the men looked kind of normal. But you don't notice, and they did that deliberately. You don't notice, and then of course that the publication of that photograph, there was that hysteria, from Margaret Thatcher, George H.W. Bush. Oh my God, Holocaust, Auschwitz. It's always, if it's Monday, it's always Auschwitz. So it was Auschwitz and whatever, but it was a fraud. The photograph was a fraud. But anyway, so Trump immediately wheeled out this thing about the Auschwitz and so on, even though, as I say, the condition of the Palestinian was as bad as the Israeli hostages. I mean, what? It's just very bad. I mean, the war is really terrible. I mean, there's no question. This has been a horrific war, and and hostage taking. It's hard to justify that. I mean, it is illegal under any of the rules of war in taking hostages. So there's no question about that. But either way, what we have in place through this ceasefire agreement was a kind of a step-by-step process. This is kind of stage one, the release of some of the hostages. And then during stage one, they begin negotiating stage two, which is leading to the complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And then, of course, we go on to stage three, which is about a permanent deal involving reconstruction and so on. So now Trump declared essentially yesterday that, well, let's scrap it. Let's scrap the agreement. Unless they release all of the hostages by noon on Saturday, essentially all hell breaks loose. And then today, Netanyahu said, "Well, as all the hostages are released, then we resume the fighting on Saturday." But Netanyahu was a little more cautious in his language. He didn't say what Trump said, which was to release all of the hostages. He said if they don't release the hostages, but he didn't really specify, which hostages. So it seems that he's going to unleash the Israeli forces on Saturday if they don't release all of the hostages, and obviously they're not going to release all of the hostages because then Hamas will have no leverage, and therefore Israel can just resume the fighting at any time because they don't have the leverage of the hostages. So we don't really know what Netanyahu means. Again, he only said release the hostages, not all of the hostages. But if the fighting does resume on Saturday, then this is going to be a real blow for Trump, because Trump has been basking in this in the plaudits of having secured this ceasefire. I read an article today in Haaretz. Somebody written by one of their columnists, was no friend of Trump, who's saying, well, look, I mean, even the people who hate Netanyahu in Israel were celebrating Trump. They were cheering Trump on because I said Trump did it. Trump leaned on Bibi, and Trump secured that ceasefire. So he's suddenly Trump was enjoying the support of the kind of the Israelis who hated Bibi. Said, hey, you did it. You did something Biden had not done. You put the pressure on Bibi. You secured the ceasefire. And Trump has been enjoying this the plaudits, the approbation, as the man who delivered the ceasefire. So now what Trump is doing is essentially he's cutting it, he's sawing off the branch on which he's sitting. He's undermining his own credibility and his own standing, because if the fighting does resume on Saturday, and suddenly again we get the killings, and again we get the scenes of women and children getting bombed, women and children being burnt alive, it's on Trump. It'll be absolutely squarely on Trump, because as the people say, you did it. You said basically, oh, we're gonna let's resume the fighting, unless they meet such and such a completely arbitrary deadline. And remember what Trump did by saying, unless all of the hostages are released on Saturday, what Trump did there was simply destroyed the deal. There was an agreement in place. It was going to be a step-by-step process, and when go through all these proceedings slowly. They never said all the hostages will be released in one batch. It would be through a lengthy process. That was the deal. And now Trump essentially is destroying the deal and encouraging the resumption of fighting. So the very negotiated deal that Steve Witkoff had gone to Israel and apparently got very tough with Netanyahu, that very agreement Trump is now throwing into a waste paper basket for no apparent reason. I mean, the agreement is working. I mean, there was no reason to destroy it. The agreement is working. Hostages are being released. Palestinian prisoners are being released. Negotiations in Qatar are being planned, or supposedly they're being planned in order to for stage two of this ceasefire agreement. So for no reason, Trump suddenly says, "Well, let's throw it aside," and he will be blamed for it because there's no one else to blame for it. He will be saying, "You were the one. You had a deal in place. The deal was working, um, and you decided to destroy it. And for what? Because you thought that they looked like Holocaust survivors. What kind of an idiot are you? I mean, you're an idiot. I mean, to say something like that, well, they look like Holocaust survivors. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. Then you don't know what Holocaust survivors look like. You don't know what people who are in death camps or wherever in concentration camps, or you don't know what they look like. You watch the news, and then some emaciated guy appears, and you suddenly you talk this nonsense about Holocaust survivors. So it's just it's ridiculous. So for that reason, you want to destroy it. Now, if he does do that, um, um, uh, the, so I love it. Sometimes I just notice somebody and says, "George, you have been wrong on this issue from day one." Nice. Oh, thank you very much. You underestimate the genocidal mentality of global white nationalism, which is led by global Zionism, true Trumpist super Zio fascism. I don't know what exactly I've been wrong about when you make this declaration. Um, the the when you say global Zio, well, it isn't the case. I say very simply, very simply, the two-state solution has been the international consensus, the international consensus, including whites and whatever, blah blah blah. The white Europeans, the white, overwhelmingly white Russians, um, and including the various colored peoples of Asia and Africa. There's been an international consensus on a two-state solution. The United States subscribed to the two-state solution. So the only two countries that have balked at the two-state solutions have been the United States and Israel. But even there's been a lot of dissimulation and deception, because the United States pretended for many years that they did subscribe to a two-state solution. Even Israel had to pretend for a while that they subscribed to a two-state solution. Now that's not the case anymore. But what Trump is now doing, and you can see even this whole thing about the Gaza plan, this idiotic Gaza plan. There's no takers. Again, if you want to talk about white, whatever, you know, all the rest of the stuff about the genocidal mentality of global white nationalism. Well, the whites are not supporting it. There's no support in Europe for the plan to remove the Palestinians from Gaza. I mean, there's no one is saying, "Hey, well, these are colored people. Let's kick out these colored people." There's no support for that. But anyway, the point is that just from Trump's political interest, he will be immediately blamed for the breakdown of the ceasefire, and rightly so. I mean, he'll be there'll be no way that you could blame anyone else. You said you had it. I mean, it was the same with the JCPOA when he walked away from the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, back in 2018. He really couldn't come up with any explanation as to why he was walking away from this agreement. The agreement was working. Iran had cut back on its uranium enrichment. It was very, all that had come to an end. Iran had given up its enriched uranium. It had handed over its enriched uranium to Russia. Everything was done on time. It was allowing inspectors into its nuclear facilities. So the plan, the agreement was working. And then Trump said, no, 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 I'm ending this. Now, it was a kind of a strange thing. Now, at the time, we kind of wondered, well, why did he do that? And we had to assume, well, he was obviously catering to the Zionist lobby, and he needed the Zionist lobby because he was running for re-election in 2020, and he obviously needed a lot of money from the Adelsons and others, and so therefore he did all of those things. I mean, it's not just the Iran nuclear deal that he walked away from. He moved the embassy, the U.S. embassy, to Jerusalem. He recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He closed down the sort of the PLO office in Washington. So he did all these things that which Israel had wanted, and then of course, as we all recall, after the 2020 election, Netanyahu turned around and promptly recognized Biden as the winner of the election. So that was so much for all the generous favors that Trump had bestowed in return for nothing. In return for absolutely nothing. Israel gave nothing at all to the United States. These were all gifts that Trump had given Israel, and got absolutely nothing in return. Even Trump himself has said that, well, we were going to kill Israel, and Netanyahu and I, we agreed on the assassination of General Soleimani, and then Netanyahu walked away at the last minute, and we were left carrying the can. So even on that, you didn't get anything from Israel, and again, he. And Netanyahu, didn't even stick by Trump on the election, on disputing the election. So Trump gave them all this shrewd businessman. He's supposed to be this really tough negotiator, tough businessman, which means you gave all this away and you got nothing in return. Well, that's not a good deal. But that's the thing. I mean, Trump has been walking on water for some time, because the Democrats, they so overplayed their hand, ridiculously overplayed their hand, trying to put him in prison and everything else. And it's absolutely, helped give the election to Trump. And suddenly, Trump seems invincible, and Trump seems, a brilliant strategist and so on. But in reality, if you go back to the first Trump term, why did Trump lose? Trump lost because he was, in fact, not the strong leader that he purported to be. He was actually a very weak leader. On issue after issue, he allowed himself to be pushed in directions that apparently he didn't want to go. I mean, we've talked so many times before. I mean, his plans to leave Afghanistan, he didn't do it. Biden saw it through. Biden did it. I mean, wasn't terribly well handled, but Biden at least did it. He actually got Americans out of Afghanistan. He said he was going to leave Syria. He never left Syria. And more seriously for him, domestically, more serious for him, he allowed himself to be befuddled by Fauci which was obviously, I mean, the lockdown was a terrible idea. Agreeing to locking down America. I mean, it's going to cause an absolute economic crisis. With businesses being shut down, and it was we know what a terrible pain that was for America and for other countries. Locking down your businesses, and then obviously he went absolutely crazy on this thing with the vaccines. Vaccines are always Fauci's thing. He's been obsessing about vaccines throughout his career. Trump embraced that, but most damagingly for Trump was his weakness during the summer of George Floyd. I mean, the summer of George Floyd was the time Trump could have shown himself to be the tough guy. Hey, I'm the law and order guy, but he didn't do anything. He allowed the cities to burn. The Democrats were very clever. They deliberately allowed these riots, the absence of any kind of authority, because they knew Trump would get blamed for it. And and Trump didn't really do anything. He just sort of sat at home tweeting out law and order, but he didn't do what the supposed tough guy would do, which is bring in the National Guard. If you bring in the National Guard, you say, yeah, obviously you're going to get attacked by the media, you're going to get attacked by the Democrats. But he was left to Tom Cotton, who wrote that famous op-ed in the New York Times. I mean, he talked about, hey, bring in the National Guard. Trump didn't do that, and then he lost. Leave aside all the terrible things which happened during the 2020 election. I was no question the terrible thing that happened, but ultimately he should have won that election comfortably, and he didn't because he was seen to be weak. And now he, having basked in this in this glory of having secured a ceasefire in the Middle East, he's about to be responsible for the resumption of the fighting. His poll numbers will drop because in this case it'll be so obvious that he and he alone is primarily responsible for the resumption of the fighting. The ceasefire was there. The ceasefire was working. People were getting released, and negotiations were supposed to begin for phase 2, and then suddenly Trump made this ridiculous intervention, demanding issuing this ultimatum for Hamas. So anyway, let's take a look at our locals page, because these are the members of our locals group, the people who ensure that the dogs are the dogs kept happy, or at least the dogs are kept away from my my throat, because that's when they see that, hey, where's the money, they just go straight for my throat. So I really appreciate the people who contribute to our group, and because they keep me safe. These dogs, they may be small, but their jaws are incredibly strong. I mean, when they you see what they can do to a bone. Can you imagine what they can do to a human throat? Anyway, Denaki, Kedvesh George, I do hope they overhype and oversell this rare earth bonanza BS to at least 100 billion trillions to get Trump to commit whatever resources. On the other hand, I thought there were 2.1 million Gazas, talk of moving 1.8. Kind of makes me think there are 300,000 dead, displaced already. Now, the thing about these rare earths and these minerals in Ukraine, I'm skeptical of pretty much all of the claims that are currently being made. I mean, when you read the Xenon contributions, they all say, "Oh, Ukraine doesn't have anything. All of the rare earths and all of this, all the minerals, they're all in the Russian occupied sector." Now, again, I'm skeptical of that. I mean, I've been reading that, in fact, much of it is in the western part of Ukraine. I'm not sure how much, and so on, and nobody really knows because this is still unexplored and unexploited. So essentially, it's a matter of speculation. How much is where? What's, I think, important is that Zelensky has picked up on this, and Zelensky is pitching these rare earth minerals, all the titanium, lithium, and uranium, and say, hey, we got all these riches here. And because he knows that that's how you appeal to Trump, and Trump is clearly interested in this. Now, if you were to tell Trump, oh, but most of it is under Russian occupation, it's the Russians who are controlling most of it, that isn't going to act as a disincentive for Trump. That, on the contrary, will incentivize Trump to say, well, we need to push the Russians out. We need to get our hands on these rare earths and these minerals and all these gases. And again, and that's why Zelensky is making this pitch about these rare earths and minerals, and he's talking about these storage space. I don't know about the supposed storage space in Ukraine where you can store this American liquefied natural gas, because they're saying, yeah, we're going to buy lots and lots and lots of liquefied natural gas from the United States, and we've got the storage space underground for this liquefied natural gas. Now, I'm not taking this very seriously, but it's enough to entice Trump, and it's clear that Trump is interested in this. He's not thinking in terms, well, I don't know, I really I got to look at all these assessments and see how much is where, he's saying, hey, we can get all this stuff, all these these rich resources underground, and we can use them to pay for our contributions to Ukraine. And in his mentality, this is a thing. Hey, this is a good business deal. They've got all these riches, and then we can make use of them. So again, if you say to Trump, yeah, but these resources are all under the control of the Russians, that will only encourage him to try to do more to push the Russians out, because he's saying, hey, there's a lot of money to be made here. All these his businessmen friends, they can all make a lot of money here. So Zelensky has been quite shrewd in arousing Trump's interest. Again, we don't have to talk about this now, but the fact is that the assertion that Trump will push Zelensky under the bus and he will abandon Ukraine and he will just simply walk away from this, there's never been the slightest scrap of evidence, not one bit, to suggest that Trump has any interest in doing that. This is all made up, completely made up, primarily by the mainstream media, who hate Trump and who have been peddling Russiagate nonsense all these years about the secret alliance between Trump and Putin, their secret friendship, the bromance and whatever between them, and that therefore, when Trump comes back to office, as first order of business, Trump will just simply liquidate the whole Ukraine project as a favor to his good friend Putin. So this was a view put out by the mainstream media, and then CNN has more or less embraced this, and And they said, yeah, that's exactly what Trump is going to do. He's going to just walk away from this. And but there's just simply no evidence that he has any intention of presiding over something that will be deemed a defeat and a humiliation for the United States and NATO. And the argument then made, which is that, oh well, it's Biden's war. It's not really Trump's war. Yeah, that's true, but it is Trump's war because it was Trump who began the serious military involvement in the United States, and Trump has never denied that. Trump has boasted of having gone where Obama was reluctant to go. He said, "Well, I started sending them these lethal weapons. Obama was sending pillows and handkerchiefs, whereas I started sending them javelins." So, um, from the start, Trump has been involved. Now, it's true that it escalated dramatically under Biden, but nonetheless, the escalation began under Trump. And again, Trump is talking about increasing American military spending. He's talking about increasing NATO commitments, and so I don't think he's going to walk away. Now, what does that mean? I mean, that's a different question about what happens in Ukraine. Um, if and when Trump does not walk away, I think it means the war goes on. And as long as the war goes on, then all bets are off. Like, all kinds of things could happen. Um, the business about the 2 million and the 300,000. I don't know. Trump is going back to talking about 2 million. I mean, today he was talking about 2 million. The 1.8 million that he was talking about last week, he's gone back to the 2 million. He has no idea, what the population of Gaza is any more than he has any idea how many have been killed in Ukraine. I mean, he just says, "Oh, millions have been killed." The way he doesn't know. I mean, nobody knows, to be honest. But he's just plucking numbers out of thin air. So, but I mean, people have been reading something into that. Oh, 1.8, so that means 300,000 are dead according to those numbers. That would assume that Trump is using some accurate numbers, and I don't think so. So I think somebody may have given him some number, and he's been repeating it, and maybe because he didn't want to go beyond 2 million. It's like, the sale. When they say, "Hey, this will cost you $999," because they know if you go $1 above that, it's 1,000, and people get a heart attack if they see it's $1,000. But if you say it's $999, that doesn't sound so bad. So may have been that's why he said 1.8 million. And then Danaki says, and I wonder what more can Trump do from these early days of his presidency already for his Zionist handlers like Wilbur Ross and Miriam Adelson, because I'm absolutely sure this has to do with so much more than just building condos on the beachfront. P.S. And the 2,000-pound Moabs it just shipped are excellent for demolition work. Well, yes, I mean that's what I'm puzzled about myself. I mean, he needed the Adelsons about initially for his reelection, and because ultimately when he first ran in 2015, 2016, he seemed to be open to a more even-handed policy on the Middle East. He seemed to talk quite sympathetically about the Palestinians. And indeed, he said during that election that he didn't need Zionist money, and he got attacked during the 2016 campaign for anti-Semitism by suggesting that there's Jewish money pouring into into other candidates' campaigns, and that therefore that's somehow anti-Semitic to suggest that the policies are being driven by Jewish money. So, and then he suddenly reversed himself while in office, and instead adopted the uber Zionist position. But that had to do with his re-election needs. It wasn't to do with um, any kind of ideological commitment to Israel, because if he had an ideological commitment to Israel, where has it been all this time? I mean, he's not. I mean, he's obviously not Jewish, and he's not a Christian Zionist. So yeah, he's got his son-in-law Jared, but so what? That's his son-in-law. I mean, who Trump is not somebody who sits there influenced by his nitwit son-in-law. That's not going to impress him. I mean, whoever is impressed by his son-in-law. So I don't see that, and then that's why. But even then, okay, he needed the money for his re-election. But why is he doing what he's doing now? I don't see any rational understanding behind that, because um, the Trump organization has extensive interests in the Persian Gulf. He has extensive interests in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates. Um, it's a family business. He has to worry about his family business. That it's going to carry on after he has departed this this earthly sphere, and therefore it doesn't make sense to antagonize all of these wealthy Arabs. And for what? Again, Israel isn't going to do anything for him. Nothing. And all these hedge fund billionaires who have suddenly gone around him. They care about Israel. They don't care about him. So the notion that you have to somehow kowtow to these horrible hedge fund creatures, that doesn't make any sense. They're not going to do anything for you. They're not going to look after your family, your business. They only care about Israel. So it doesn't make a great deal of sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense on any political reckoning, because this is going to go wrong very quickly, and he's going to pay the political price for it. He's enjoying this honeymoon period at the moment, but the honeymoon period derives, I think, in large part, that he's held responsible for having succeeded in the ceasefire. Hey, he put the pressure on Bibi. Then you're going to throw that out of the window, and then suddenly, you get the war, you get the chaos, and then that's his poll numbers will tank. And keep in mind, the clock is ticking. I mean, the midterm campaign, it's going to be starting up. In about a year's time, we're already, we're going to be in the midst of the midterms. So it doesn't make too much sense to me. Anyway, Judy Hotchkiss. Judy, always very good to see you. Thank you, Judy, for your generosity. And then Judy says, aside from the babbling about Ukraine's minerals, here's the big news that the mainstream media is freaking out about today. Here's CNN. Ukraine. Oh, yes, you're absolutely right. Ukraine may be Russian someday, Trump says ahead of Van Zelensky meeting. They may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, Trump said. The U.S. president's comments will likely delight the Kremlin which has illegally annexed 4 Ukrainian regions. You're absolutely right, Judy. It's so hilarious because that's the headline in a number of news stories. Trump says, CNN, of course, featured this prominently, that he said this yesterday afternoon, I guess. So it was already, quite late at night here. They had the blaring kind of CNN chyron saying, Ukraine may be Russian someday. But it was the way Trump speaks. He says Ukraine may be Russian someday. It may not. They may not. Was it? They said Ukraine may be Russian today. Ukraine may not be Russian. I thought it said something. Yeah, they may not be Russian someday. He was just simply saying, I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen, which I think is honest. But he is kind of saying, which I think is perfectly appropriate. I mean, I wish he was more consistent in saying it, which is that ultimately I couldn't care less. In other words, I don't care. I'm the president of the United States, and it doesn't really matter very much to me which way it's going to go in Ukraine. Um, but if we are going to be, commit ourselves to Ukraine, then we need to get something out of it. So when he said, well, Ukraine may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, saying, well, it could go either way. But at the same time, if we are going to commit ourselves to Ukraine, then we should get something out of it, and the issue of the minerals comes up there. Now, CNN had these some English guy. I mean, everyone in CNN is always some English guy. I don't understand. Everyone talks in with these English accents. I mean, don't they have any Americans who can do anything? Anyway, some English guy getting quite hysterical. He's always, he's abandoning Ukraine. But of course, they never ask the question. The obvious question is that, well, why shouldn't he abandon Ukraine? I mean, it's like, what's Ukraine done for the United States? I mean, Ukraine has certainly done things for the Democratic Party. We know that they've done things for the Democratic Party, but what's Ukraine done for the United States? And that's why when they start approaching things in this very emotional, moralistic way, where somehow Trump is reprehensible in raising the issue, which is, well, what's America getting out of it? And now this whole mineral thing is I think it's a lot of nonsense. But Zelensky's playing his hand cleverly in trying to entice Trump. But the point is, why should Americans care about Ukraine? I mean, I of course go further and say, well, why should Americans care about Israel? And Trump doesn't go there. But I think it's perfectly, absolutely, important and essential for any American president to start asking, well, why should we care? Why should we care whether Ukraine will be Russian one day? It just incorporates into Russia. But instead, this English guy gets all very emotional because somehow this is immoral. And of course, I mean, everybody here, of course, knows the history very well. But they all say, well, if you don't like this deal, that Russia taking over bits of Ukraine, the 4 oblasts and so on. Well, if you don't like that deal, then probably you should have taken the deal that was on offer at Minsk 1 and 2. And if you didn't like that deal, you probably should have taken the deal that was on offer in February 2014 with Yanukovych. I mean, the coalition government that Yanukovych created. And if you didn't like that deal, again, there was the Istanbul deal. So there were plenty of deals along the way, which you could have then said, well, you could settle for that. And now they're getting emotional and how immoral to think in terms of surrendering pieces of territory of Ukraine to Russia. Again, what do you care? I mean, are you a Ukrainian? Are you a Russian? Or so what? It's like, what do you care? probably it might not have been a bad idea to, accept geography, accept history, and work something out instead of waging this crazy war. But it's. I mean, you're absolutely right, Judy. I mean, the way CNN presents it, as if somehow it's Trump who is being immoral, whereas he's just basically saying, well, why? What's our interest in all of this? What are we getting? And then, and that's why Trump raises this whole issue. Well, we're going to get all these minerals and these rare earths and so on. But at least you're saying, well, we should get something for it. We should get something for our investment. There's a lot of money that's poured in. So yeah, that's that's classic CNN. And Stone River, nice to see you, Stone River. Thank you so much for your generosity. Stone River says headlines scream that, quote, ending war in Ukraine to top agenda at Munich Security Conference, but Russia not invited for fourth year in a row. Serious stuff. Yes, it's very interesting that there is all this talk about all the negotiations that are supposed to take place in Munich, and and you're absolutely right. I mean, in every media outlet, there are all these stories about the American delegation will include Vice President Vance, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Zelensky will represent the Ukrainian side. Then, of course, doubtless, there'll be the usual gang. Ursula von der Leyen will be there. I don't know whether Sergeant Schultz will be there. I mean, isn't he supposed to be campaigning? I mean, he's in terrible trouble in the election. But I imagine he'll show up for a couple of sessions. I mean, it's in his country after all. But the point is, if there were any serious negotiations to take place, then the very minimum would be, well, the Russians should be there. And then if the Russians are there, maybe, some people could get into a room somewhere and draft some quick agreement, not a peace agreement, but at least an agreement for a procedure of how we can move onto kind of a negotiating procedure, even negotiations about negotiations. But the minimum, you would have to have Russians. I mean, if you're just going to have Ursula von der Leyen and Annalena Baerbock and Zelensky, then what exactly are you talking about? I mean, you can't have any kind of an agreement. You can't have any negotiations if one party, the most important party, isn't there. And what I find so striking, I mean, what you said here, Stone River, is that it's rarely mentioned. I mean, you go through one newspaper report after another, and there's no mention there. Oh, the Russians are not going to be at Munich, which is quite striking. So there'll be talks, but Russia's not there. And it's also very striking that, particularly given it's the Munich Security Conference, and this is when Putin really made his mark on the world, when it was in 2007, so 18 years ago, when he delivered his famous speech. And John McCain, the late unlamented John McCain, foamed at the mouth, But that's where you could say he gave his first clear warning that what NATO is doing now is going to end very badly. I mean, this was it's going to end badly. So he was here at Munich that he said this. And then it was in 2022 at the Munich Security Conference where Zelensky threatened to acquire nuclear weapons. He's had that before. He's threatened to acquire nuclear weapons, and where Kamala Harris, who then led the American delegation in 2022, again did the usual bluster, which is Ukraine will be a member of NATO. All of which, I think the Russians had already made their decision, but that only firmed up Russia's decision to launch the special military operation. So NKMRD says dinner for one. Let me see. I can't see the picture. NKMR1 dinner for one. Who's that in the picture? Is that Howard Dean who's in that in the picture that the dinner for one? Because he looks really like Howard Dean at his most demented. I don't know. Howard Dean was a total nut. Anyway, let's see. Let's go back. Okay. So then NKMRD says, I used to believe that one president goes after the Middle East, and then the next one goes after Russia until the Middle East guy comes in again. I don't feel utterly negative about that theory at the moment. That's an interesting one, and I think you're absolutely correct, because I think there's a distinction to be made between the Republicans and the Democrats. So the Republicans are preoccupied with the Middle East, and the Republicans are very much, absolutely, unconditionally committed to Israel. Obsession of the Republicans about Israel. So they do tend to get very much sucked into the Middle East and fighting wars in the Middle East on behalf of Israel. Now, the Democrats, while they used to be very much in the Israel camp, and remember, it was Truman. He didn't have to do it. Truman, who, essentially in violation of international law, recognized the state of Israel. That was a serious step. There was not a United Nations thing. Israel had unilaterally seized Arab territory. It was not territory that had been assigned to Israel by the United Nations. And then Truman went ahead and recognized the state of Israel. And then Eisenhower was a Republican, wasn't a great fan of Israel, was the one president who really issued an ultimatum to Israel to withdraw from Sinai after the 56 war. The Democrats used to be very, very pro-Israel. Republicans were less than keen. Again, Lyndon Johnson was very, very pro-Israel. He overlooked what happened to the USS Liberty. It was a disgrace. Whereas Nixon was, again, not a huge fan of Israel. It was under Nixon that they put forward the Rogers peace plan, which was a kind of a land for peace deal. But it was Rogers, and the Israelis were absolutely panicking that Nixon's Secretary of State put forward a serious peace plan, a land for peace. But after that, after Nixon, but essentially the Republicans became more and more immersed with Israel. But even with Reagan, presented a peace plan that involved some form of a Palestinian state. It wasn't quite a Palestinian state, but nonetheless, it was a joint state with Jordan and Palestine. So the Jordanians would be responsible for the Palestinians. But it was a peace plan. Again, the Israelis hated it. But since those days, the Republicans have become much more unconditionally supportive of Israel, whereas the Democrats, particularly with given the influence of George Soros, they become very anti-Russian. And again, especially after the end of the Cold War, they became more and more hostile towards Russia and more preoccupied with NATO expansion and trying to surround Russia with hostile states on its border. That was much more of the Democratic agenda. Republicans weren't particularly; they went along with it, but it wasn't their specific agenda. So that's when you have. So you're right. You have there's an alternating between Republicans and Democrats, but by and large, at least since the Cold War ended, you can say the Democrats, by and large, they're preoccupied with NATO. They're preoccupied with defeating or crushing and inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, while the Republicans, are touting the glories of Israel, and um, and I think so, some Trump seems to be going in that direction. We'd hoped that he wouldn't do that, but he seems to be heading in that direction. No need for it, but that's where the Republicans are. Even all of those Republicans who say that the Ukraine thing, we should bring it to an end. It's terrible. It makes no sense. Whatever the Bannons of this world, they're unconditional supporters of Israel. They just love Israel. So, um, Kick 567 says, George, do you believe these Arab dictators like the MBS and the King of Jordan will sell out? He was just at the White House selling dreams. Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I tend to think that they won't. Because I think they have to think about their political survival. They cannot survive if they in any way cooperate with this mass displacement of Palestinians. I mean, there's just none of them. Um, MBS will not survive. I don't think the king of certainly not the King of Jordan. I mean, again, the King of Jordan will remember. I mean, he was a small boy at the time, but he will remember what happened in the 1970 Civil War. I mean, it almost destroyed his father's kingdom. I mean, the King Hussein barely survived. He had to be rescued by the Nixon administration. Um, so he knows what will happen. I mean, you bring in the Palestinians. I mean, and Trump was talking about, well, we'll have a sliver of land in Jordan and we'll house the Palestinians. He knows the moment you bring the Palestinians in, they're going to overthrow him, and they're going to take over the state, and then resume the war against Israel. So it's a totally self-destructive thing. I can't believe he would go along with it. Egypt knows also he can't go along with it. And even MBS knows that. I mean, his regime. I mean, can you imagine Arab League? What happens at the meeting of the Arab League? And they say, hey, we're all presiding over this mass expulsion of the Palestinians. I mean, it's just they can't do it. So I think they're just waiting for the whole thing to blow over. And then, the very absurdity of this plan will become apparent, and then it'll graduate. So they're being very polite, as Abdullah was rather polite in his conversation with Trump, but it was clear that, he's not going to go along with this plan. I mean, you could certainly lean on him, but it's more than his kingdom is worth. I mean, yeah, you can say we're going to withdraw whatever, however many billions the Americans give him. It doesn't really matter because he won't have a kingdom if he starts allowing the Palestinians into his kingdom. So that's that. Carlos, top of the evening. Good to see you, Carlos. And then here we have Brown, who says apropos of Trump, about they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian, they may not be Russian. And Brown says, this is classic Trump, make statements that shock lots of people. It causes his opponents to freak out, gives him more potential space to make a deal, as well as a tactical advantage. He's been doing this his entire business career, all the way back to the skating rink project at Rockefeller Center at NY back around 1980. Well, I do think that is how Trump operates, and I think that he the Gaza plan, whatever one, it's not a plan. I mean, it's I think it's a harebrained idea, but whatever it is, falls into that. The um, the problem is that he doesn't really get these good deals. I mean, it's like, well, I did all this with Iran. Well, what did he get out of that deal with Iran? I mean, nothing. He walked away from the Iran nuclear deal, and he got nothing in return. As I said earlier, I mean, he gave all these goodies to Israel. He got nothing in return. So I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and I with Judy, is that CNN is freaking out in a ridiculous way because it doesn't mean anything. I mean, that's the way he talks. Well, maybe have this, maybe this. We'll see what happens. I mean, yeah, but he knows he always dominates the news cycle because everyone starts freaking out, and that's all everyone talks about is what Trump accomplishes. But he doesn't do the deal, and that was his problem. If he had succeeded in getting any of these deals done during his first term, he would have been reelected very comfortably. I tend to think, there was an awful lot of fraud in that the 2020 election, but nonetheless, it didn't have to come to that. Again, Trump should have been able to win that one comfortably, but he didn't get a deal done. And I think that's that. And what he's doing now, say with Israel, is I think he's undermining any prospect of a deal. He's, having already seen how little Israel has accomplished in 16 months. Why would anyone think that they'll accomplish something in the next 6 months? Give them another 12 months, and they're going to accomplish something else. Then they can't do it. They cannot crush Hamas. However many Hamas fighters they will kill, there's always going to be somebody to take their place. I mean, they killed Sinwar, made no difference. So at least there is, with the peace deal, you could say, well, here's a peace deal. And if you have but if you throw that aside, then you don't have anything. And that, I think, is the difference between him and Nixon. We're always singing the praises of Nixon here, but the reason is that Nixon did sign deals, and that's what you do a deal. And Nixon, he was the one who kind of created that whole the madman theory. Again, it was wildly exaggerated, but Nixon signed deals. He signed all the arms control deals, and above all, he finally signed a deal to get Americans out of Vietnam. It was a kind of an interim agreement, and it was very unlikely South Vietnam would survive. But that no one really cared. He got the Americans out, and there was an agreement signed in Paris, and that's the measure of a successful president. Can you get a deal? That will at least last a few years beyond the time of your term in office. Then it all collapses, but at least it lasted through the end of your term in office. So that's why I'm just really dubious. Maybe next time we could talk. We spent so much time on the Middle East, we didn't really get onto what's going to happen with Russia and Ukraine. But again, I'm somewhat skeptical that he can get a deal done there. It's maybe. But that'll depend on really what the Russians are really thinking and how the Russians will comport themselves. Again, when you look to it, Xenon, who will tell us The Russia will absolutely not negotiate anything. They will demand unconditional surrender from Ukraine. They're winning the war, so they won't stop until Ukraine gives in on every single point. I'm not buying it. Just not buying it. I think this war is a real problem for Russia. I think Russia wants some way out of it that they will accomplish some of their goals. They won't accomplish all of their goals, to say the least. But they want to. But the idea they're just going to continue. I mean, it may happen, but I don't think they would just refuse to negotiate. And again, that's never been, Putin. They say, oh, the Russians are disillusioned with the West. They don't believe anything the West says, and so on and so. They've burnt their fingers so often in talking to the West that they don't see any purpose, for any more negotiation. Well, that may be true, but that's not the that's not the views that are coming from Moscow. The views from Moscow, they still talk about our Western partners. They repeatedly say we're ready to negotiate, but with such and such conditions have to be realized, and so on. So they haven't ruled out negotiations completely. Anyway, Marx 2023 says it's high time the Gulf of Finland is renamed the Gulf of Russia. Well, I'm all for that. That would cause a state of emergency in the EU. That would be nice. All right, that's nice. Okay. Yeah, I'm for that. Call it the Gulf of Russia. Marx 2023 says 1 dozen eggs in California, $12. That is an awful lot. $12 is that free range chicken, or I mean, I imagine it's not standard supermarket eggs. I mean, free. I mean, yeah, at the very least, it should be free range chicken eggs. But that was wow, $12. That's painful. Anne Marie, always very good to see you. And Anne Marie, thank you very much for your generosity, and thank you for your comment on the Delius piece of music. I thought it was very interesting and insightful. Um, I mean, you said that that you intend to play it. I would love. I mean, obviously it's up to you, but I would love if you could at some point, post on our page you're playing, Delius or whatever piece of music that you've been playing, and sort of, we could enjoy your musicianship. I mean, I would love that, but obviously it's up to you whether you want to do that. But if you have examples of your work, and I'm sure all other Gagglers would love to listen to your musical playing. So, but thank you so much for your comments about Delius. So he's a very English composer, though he lived in France. I mean, his music is, to me, it sounds very English, and it's very much English, like appreciation of nature, English country gardens, and I really like it very much. But it's distinctively English, like like Elgar's music, Vaughan Williams as well, Walton. It's it gives very much. Gives you a sense of the beauty of nature, the countryside, and so I really enjoyed that kind of music. But anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. And think about posting some musical contribution. Anyway, Marx says America accounts for only 15% of Chinese exports, of which 60% is from American companies, factories based in China. Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. But a lot of Chinese exports are a load of crap. I mean, you know, I mean, I buy a lot of this. You buy all sorts of stuff, all the time. Made in China. It's pretty crappy, to be honest. It's cheap, no question. It's very cheap. But you buy some lamps for your bicycle. It's rubbish. I mean, it's not going to work. It works for about 2 weeks. Buy a coffee maker, crap. It's not. 2 weeks. It's already not working. So yeah, they a lot of Chinese exports. but it's not really quality products. I mean, it's not in a way that, let's say, when you had Germany and Japan. I mean, again, particularly Japan, it was an obsession in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, the Japanese were just renowned throughout the world for the quality of their products. And you buy something Japanese, relatively inexpensive, but it was of very high quality. Um, I don't think Chinese goods have that reputation. I'm not saying all Chinese goods, but they don't have that um, that awe-inspiring reputation that Japanese and German manufactured products have. R. Brown says Trump statements like Ukraine could be part of Russia or 500 billion in rare earth minerals for military aid. Um, will own Gaza and rebuild it after moving all the surviving Palestinians out, are all of a piece. It's part and parcel of Trump's long term pattern of creating a fluid environment to achieve his endgame goals. Some or all maybe BS or serious. Well, I look, I don't mind, you know, people, bullshitting. I mean, that's fine. I mean, that's, it's entertaining. um, the problem arises if, as a result of his bluster, um, people start getting killed, and and I think what he's saying now in Gaza, I think, he's going to be giving a green light to Israel to abandon the ceasefire and the ceasefire negotiations. I mean, it may not happen, may not, but there's enough in what he said to encourage the nutcases in Israel to go for it. And there's no reason for it. I mean, I'm all for, again, BS and whatever, but if there's a reason for it, but if you've got a peace agreement in place or a ceasefire agreement in place, and the ceasefire agreement is being implemented, then why destroy it? Why tear up something that at the moment is working? I mean, if it's not working, then you walk away. But Trump, he kind of walks away from a lot of things. And again, I mean, if we go back to that first term, he walked away from the INF agreement, the intermediate range missile agreement. There was no need for it. There were issues arose, and it could have been resolved, and he walked away from it. Walked away from the Open Skies agreement, and that's, I mean, the the theory underlying it is that, oh well, I'll walk away from it and then we'll get a better agreement. But there was no better agreement. That's gone. The INF agreement's gone. There's no better agreement. And now there's a good chance that we're going to walk away from the New START treaty. I mean, again, he's walking away from it. I mean, I don't think these arms control agreements are such a big deal. Which a lot of people think about. But I don't, they're nice to have. But most important is to have good working relations among the great powers. And I think that, and then if you have good working relations, then you have arms control agreements. I mean, if you don't have good relations, then the arms control agreements are pretty meaningless. So I don't think I'm not one of the people who gets hysterical about, oh my God, what happened to the New START treaty? More important is if America and Russia have a working relationship, and try to, in which they respect one another's sovereignty, respect one another's spheres of influence. I mean, that I think is much more important. And then once you've done that, then come the arms control agreements. Anyway, Brown says the purpose is always to get more leverage in negotiations. Well, where's the negotiations? I mean, we've seen his walking away from things, but we haven't had the negotiations. Again, the JCPOA, he walked away from it, but where were the negotiations? One statement would shock the Ukrainian side, and another would trouble the Russian side. Trump's trying to work both sides. Okay. Well, I think that's the intent. It's a different case whether it's successful. Anyway, Kick 567 says George, South Dakota has a population of 250 Jews who live there. out of 919,318 folks. Okay. Christy Nome, the former governor of the state and the new Homeland Security chief, had an anti Semitic law just passed. We can't criticize Jews, so protect Jews, send them here to South Dakota. Um, yeah, yeah, well, look, I mean, they American politicians, um, they know which side their bread is buttered. They know who wields power. I mean, look, all of these things, all of these crackdowns on free speech are disgusting. And then, there's a carve out that we're not supposed to criticize um, Israel, which is what it's really about. It's criticizing Israel. They want to talk, criticizing the Jews, but of course they mean criticizing Israel. It's thoroughly despicable. It's obviously in violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution, and it should be challenged. All of these laws should be challenged in the courts precisely because they're obviously in violation of the Constitution. It doesn't matter, what you think of Israel or the Jews or whatever. Free speech is enshrined in the Constitution. Anyway, Danaki says precisely with the problem the Palestinians could create at the border with Egypt and Jordan. I think the Zionists will try the Morocco and Somaliland route. Well, they can try, but you still got to move them. I mean, the logistics of dumping 2 million people against their will anywhere. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I don't think it can be done. It just simply cannot be done. It's a lot of talk, and maybe Trump or Netanyahu think that they can frighten the Palestinians into leaving, and maybe they can frighten the few. They're not going to frighten 2 million. Um, Mark says you will not win the tariff war if you don't have replacement products or local manufacturing. The days of American industrialists are long gone. Then there's the supply chain. China owns the majority of the supply and mining. China is the world's largest processor of commodities, minerals. American environmental law would be in court for many years for new mines and processing plants. That's why America cannot win. Well, I don't know whether America cannot win. I mean, all of this um, can be challenged. I mean, absolutely, it's challenging. The tariff war, you can absolutely win a tariff war, but you have to um, pursue it consistently. I mean, you have to be very serious about it. I mean, the notion America cannot win is look, America's still the biggest economy in the world. It's the biggest financial center of the world. I mean, it's just if it puts its mind to it, it's where the most important industries are. Where the it's computers, AI, the software, whatever. Well, this is the bioengineering. The most important industries, the cutting edge industries, are in the United States. Now, for a variety of reasons, the United States has allowed a lot of its industries to be gutted and a lot of them to be shipped overseas. That can change, and that should change. So, absolutely, America can easily take on China um, if it has the will to do so. But a lot of people are making money from China, and China has bought up a lot of unscrupulous characters in the United States, and they have helped in this process of offshoring. But absolutely, America can undertake a policy of making sure that industries are in the United States, making sure that their intellectual property is not stolen, limit the Chinese students in American universities. There are all sorts of things you can do to deal with the China problem. So I don't, I'm not buying that you can't do it. You just have to, you have to have the will to do it. But unfortunately, too many Americans are on the Chinese payroll. R. Brown says, if El-Sisi takes Palestinians to hold on to the $4 billion in US aid, do you think the Egyptian um, uh, military will take him out? Um, well, I think he is the Egyptian military. I just don't think he's going to do that. I just think that it's such a completely harebrained notion. I mean, anybody at all who worries about Egypt, the political stability, the social stability in Egypt, will not will say no. You can't do. We're just importing civil war. What kind of a political leader will say I'm going to import civil war into my country, and I'm going to guarantee that Israel will now be attacking my country? But Israel, having accomplished in 1978 when they finally ended the war with Israel with the Camp David Accords, having accomplished that, now they're going to start this war with Israel will start up again because, of course, the Palestinians in Egypt will immediately start preparing for a war with Israel, which means that that the Sinai will be under constant attack from Israel. So I don't think Sisi would agree to something like that, and if he did, I think I think he would be taken out by the military. I think he would be taken out by any responsible leader because you're bringing a civil war and a war with Israel into our country. Um, and and, and, um, and as R. Brown says, apropos of the South Dakota, says there are 50,000 Jews in Mexico out of a population of 130 million, and yet they have a Jewish president with the European Marxist grandparents and parents. Jews are 30. Jews are about 2% of the U.S. population, but they hold 15% of the U.S. Senate seats and a similar percentage of House elects. It's a similar situation. Is it a similar situation in European? Well, there's no question that it's a 2% population, but what's striking in the United States, it's not like, well, the Jews are about 2% of the population, but it's they, they have key industries in their control. And what are the key industries? Well, finance, Wall Street. Jews are heavily represented in Wall Street. Um, they are very heavily represented within the legal profession in a country like the United States, highly litigious. You control the legal profession. That's a powerful base. Um, very much present in the at universities and in the administrative level and in the donor and the funding level at universities. And of course, they're very much present in the media. And so, 2% of the population, but the influence that they exert is is huge. And then when it comes to the politicians, they're very, very, very skilled at bankrolling politicians. We remember what Thomas Massey said about congressmen and senators. They get a minder, an APAC minder, as soon as they arrive in the House. And then if you don't toe the line, then they target you. They try to take you out. And this is they tried to take out Thomas Massey. Luckily Massey has a kind of built up a base of support among libertarians, but he came under ferocious attack from the neocons. The usual anti-Semite, fascist, Hitler admirer, and so on. But usually that works. that kind of attacks works. It didn't work in the case of Massey. So that it's 2% of the population. That doesn't mean much. I mean, if you've got that kind of influence, um, you know. Anyway, was it? Coily Finton says, "What about the precedence of mass movement of peoples under the Convention overturning the exchange of Greek and Turkish population of the 1920 millions of people. You're absolutely right. There was a massive exchange of populations. Um, However, there were agreements in place to facilitate this. Now, so there were states were in agreements. The Greeks and the Turks had agreed on these exchanges of population. Now, so obviously there's some coercion that was involved, but nonetheless, these were agreements based on treaties. Now, in this case, there's not going to be any agreement. The Palestinians are not going to go, and then no state is willing to accept them. And as I said before, I mean, that was 100 years ago, and nothing like that has happened really since at the end of World War II. So what happened in the 1920s, the early 1920s, was a continuation of World War One, which involved mass depopulation, and mass exchanges of peoples, very undesirable. But people had been so brutalized by the war that essentially the public had become inured to human suffering. Same after the war. I mean, nobody really gave a damn about the Germans. You got 15 million Germans that were just picked up, lock, stock, and barrel, and dumped into Germany. No compensation. Boom. You just move them. And but again, that was a continuation of the horrors of World War II. You start doing anything like this now, just people are going to be watching it on television. Remember those things were all done with before television. People are going to be watching it on television. They're going to be watching it on the internet. That's going to have a huge impact. So I mean, I think taking as an exemplar of the exchanges of the Greeks and the Turks, more than 100 years ago. I don't think that's going to work. And Coy then says, if anyone is taking Palestinians, it should be America. I agree, and then I would also bring up the issue. Why continue having Israel there? I mean, how is it serving anyone's interests other than the interests of Israelis? I mean, it's caused instability. you know, but more than 100 years of instability in the Middle East. A perpetual war of people who are constantly at war with their neighbors. There's not one neighbor of Israel's that Israel is not at war with. So why not? Then, if you want a final solution, I don't want to use that word, but if you want to address the Middle East problem, then you can say, well, why not get Israel out? Get somebody to take them in. Why not America? I mean, America, that's a big country, lots and lots of rich land. Move Israel into the United States, make that the 51st state of the United States. And anyway. So, Marty, always very good to see you. Thank you very much for your generosity, Marty. And Marty, was you were really the first to bring up the Delius issue, and you featured that film made by Ken Russell about Delius, who made that in the 1960s. I mean, I think you posted that before, that film, which is a very interesting film. Again, at the time when Russell was making quite restrained films before he went completely haywire with his films about Liszt and Tchaikovsky. I remember Spaceman. It says, George, what was the last movie you saw in a movie theater? Wow. That's a that's a good question. I saw a Hungarian movie in a movie theater maybe about a year ago, 18 months ago. That was a bad film, and I can't even remember the title, but it really depressed me. It's I like movies that are kind of inspiring or humorous or something that raises you. This one kind of lowered you. I mean, it was about not interesting people, violent, stupid people. It was just depressing, as Hungarian films by and large are. So I think that's the last film I saw in the theater, and it reminded me why I haven't watched Hungarian movies in several decades. Deeply depressing, deeply uninspiring, deeply unelevating. So, um, yeah, that's not good. Um, but yeah, movie theaters are not my not my thing. Um, but Spaceman, thank you very much. Love have hearing your comments. Thank you. And speaking of that, please, if you have ideas about what the theme of the next movie poll should be, please come up with suggestions. And I love hearing suggestions. So this one about utopia and dystopia, I think it was a very good suggestion. There was so many dystopian movies that it was kind of hard for me to whittle it down to 8. So probably we're going to have another poll at some point of other utopia and dystopia movies. But if you have better ideas for the next poll, please suggest them. Because I'm always on the lookout for ideas. So please suggest some good ideas for the next screening. And anyway, Tanaki says tomorrow afternoon EU time, Peter will join Germ Warfare and Sasha Letipova on an X Space about COVID as a military operation. Looking forward to it. Okay. Um, good. And then, where are I? Okay. Um, yeah, so JD Vance is owned by Peter Thiel. Okay. Um, and the kick says, George, we have love for Peter, so the dogs will not eat him up. That's very nice of you. Thank you. Um, and then Anne Marie says, more evidence also by Gallant has emerged that Israel allegedly killed many more of its own citizens by applying the Hannibal Directive. No, I think that's absolutely right. Do you think that any of this will ever appear in Western mainstream media? Um, Probably not, but some of it has certainly appeared in the Israeli media. I think Haaretz has featured some stories about the Hannibal Directive and what actually happened on October the 7th. And so the real numbers as to how many Hamas killed is really very different from all the claims, the 1,200 and whatever. Remember, it was originally 1,400. Um, but yeah, I mean, the Israeli media, the better of the Israeli media, Haaretz has featured the stories about what actually happened, the Hannibal Directive, and but I doubt very much that too much of the Western mainstream media will take it up. Just like the story about the rapes, the mass rapes. Um, Haaretz debunked a lot of the mass rape uh, uh, claims, and but very few of the mainstream media have done any of their own reporting. Instead, the mainstream media have simply repeated all the claims about the Hamas's mass rapes. They didn't really recount Haaretz's findings. So um, and uh, and then we have Robert, thank you very much, Robert, says in the Sputnik article, Ilya Tsukhanov asked just how did ex-USA boss Samantha Power manage to accumulate wealth 100 times her after-tax salary amid reports that her net worth soared to 30 million while she was at USAID. The moral of the story seems to be that creatures like Power, while billing themselves great humanitarian activists, can't wait to use government projects as their own slush fund the moment the opportunity presents itself. No, you're absolutely correct. I haven't read that article. I'm going to look that article up. So let me write it down. Ilya Tsukhanov. Tsukhanov. Um, but yeah, it is absolutely a slush fund, and particularly a slush fund for the Democrats, which is why they're so agitated about tampering with USAID. They've been using this as funds that essentially has been supposedly going abroad, but actually ending up in the United States and ending up supporting democratic politicians, democratic projects. That's how they got so rich. That's why they're so upset that this gravy train is will disappear. And so I didn't know that she was was now 30 million. That's an amazing amount. But yeah, I mean that's what they do. They fund these projects abroad, and but this money then returns. This is just a money laundering operation. That money then goes back to the United States to bankroll democratic projects, and that, but she's not the only one who has got really rich. I mean, there's a number of the key Democrats who've got rich through USAID. So yeah, um, and Kick says that so anyway, I've done that. Um, And Anne-Marie says, small misunderstand. I actually will not play Delia's, but Kodai's Dances of Galanta, which you posted a few weeks ago. Very exciting. No, we did. The Dances of Galanta is a tremendous piece of music. And I love that. It has there's a real Hungarian feel to it. So yeah, okay, that's yeah. But anytime um, you want to play anything, Anne Marie, absolutely just please post it on our locals board. I know everyone will appreciate it. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you, everybody who has joined me. Thank you above all um, for all of your comments and contributions, and above all, those who have put something into the tip jar, because none of that goes to me. It all goes to the to those ferocious hounds. They just take it all. It's mine. Get out of here. But thank you for thinking about them. And thank you for all the stimulating conversations, stimulating ideas. We will be back next Thursday, which not next this Thursday, not always a source of confusion. This Thursday, not next Thursday, this Thursday. Look forward to seeing you then. Until then, goodbye, good night. See you Thursday. Bye.